cannot expect to be treated, because if you knew that the drug works, you should not be doing research with it. You should just be giving that product to people. If you know that the drug doesn't work, you still shouldn't be doing research. The only time research makes sense is when you don't know if the drug works or doesn't work.
This is the Darshan Talks podcast, regulatory guy, irregular podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. You can find the show on Twitter at Darshan Talks or the show's website at darshantalks.com.
So if you don't know, then is that person really participating in it for treatment? Is the person taking the product really participating in it for treatment? So that's why people call the people participating study subjects. Failing to obtain IRB approval for changes. A lot of doctors sometimes have a little bit of a God complex, and they might go back and say, you know what? I know what's best for my patients. I'm going to just do whatever I want to do. The IRB is responsible for making sure that these steps are compliant with what is expected, and it's in accordance with the study protocol. So that might be one of the FDA's findings. Failure to maintain case histories. So again, if you're overseeing a patient, if you're overseeing to make sure that appropriate steps are being taken, it's important that what you do is maintain a case history of the patient. Failure to adequately dispose of the drug. Now that's interesting and that's important because you want to make sure that the product is being disposed of in compliance with environmental protections, but also if it's a controlled substance, is it getting into the wrong hands? One of the key ways is giving it back to the sponsor. The sponsor may either have gone bankrupt or may not be there anymore, or they're just taking far too long to get it back. What processes do you have to handle it? Failure to supervise. So often clinical research is being done by pharmaceutical companies, and it's being and they know what processes go along with that. Sometimes you might have a situation where the doctor is doing the research themselves and they don't have appropriate oversight. And that's concerning as well. And failure to follow the protocol. And we spoke about that a little bit earlier. Failure to follow protocol often comes from the fact that these physicians' offices may land up in a scenario where they go, I think this is best for the patient. They're thinking like clinicians, which is what they're trained to do. And they're supposed to work in the best interest of the patients. However, if you do that and you're customizing treatment for them, then it's not research anymore because it's not generalizable. Again, the goal of research is that it has to be generalizable to the general public. If you are changing it and customizing it, you cannot get the data that helps the general public. The next situation that you have to think about is, okay, the FDA found these things. What could the FDA actually do? So they could issue what's called a 483. So they come in with a notice of inspection, giving what's called a 482. And then they actually have a 483, which is issued to the investigator at the site. You could have a titled or an untitled letter, which is from the FDA saying, these are the concerns that we have. You guys need to fix this. If it's still really bad, what they might have is an injunction. And what an injunction is you go to the court and you tell them that we have concerns. The FDA has concerns, and the FDA will say, we judge need your permission to tell the company to stop doing what we don't think is problematic. So they could stop the clinical research at your place. They could actually tell you to step down in some way. And typically it's again, a court mandated order. It will be, you really don't want to get to that point if you can help it. If you are a pharmaceutical company, you could have delayed or lack of further approvals, which is a big stick that the FDA uses. So if you have a pipeline of drugs, you don't want this drug slowing down all the other drugs that you have going through. Corporate integrity agreements. And corporate integrity agreements are basically an agreement between the government and the pharmaceutical company or doctor's office or whoever it is that they're doing this agreement with. And what they do is they list, here are the conditions that we'll all agree to. And you'd think that that's a good thing. But these corporate integrity agreements, in the case of pharmaceutical companies, can be extremely onerous. It can go into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Well, I'm sorry, I'm wrong. Hundreds of millions of dollars, depending on what types of efforts have to be taken to get into compliance. Another one could be disbarment and disqualification. So if you are a doctor, if you are a nurse who's participating in this research, you could be banned and not be able to work with companies that are that work with FDA or HHS. HHS is the parent organization for the FDA. And depending on the severity of what you're doing and depending on what exactly you're doing, you could be disqualified from working with either or both. And if it's both, you have problems because now you might be a doctor's office, but you wouldn't even be qualified to sweep floors in a pharmacy, because a pharmacy also does business with HHS. And they basically say, if you do business with HHS, which accounts for about 80% of healthcare spending, we're not going to allow you to employ these people, anyone who's been disqualified. So that can be an automatic job loss. And depending on when it happens in your career, it could be either temporary or permanent, and could be could be a major issue. You could also have civil and criminal penalties, and there have been several recently. There's in fact something called the Heat Squad, and that's the FDA and the DOJ working together to go after individuals or companies who might be committing healthcare fraud. So again, something to think about. The next step we're going to get into is responding to an inspection. What I'm going to do is take a break here. Stay tuned. We're going to have another event, another recording, and you guys can listen to that part of it. Stay tuned. And by the way, subscribe. Thanks.
This was part 2 of a 4-part series on FDA inspections. Part 3 is up next on the Darshan Talks podcast. Regulatory Guy, Irregular Podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. You can find the show on Twitter at Darshan Talks or the show's website at darshantalks.com.